I'm the senior digital strategist for the company. So my background is in a whole host of different things. I started a long, long time ago in web design. I was the IT manager for a little company called Franchise Direct, and then for myhome.ie before the apocalypse. And then after the apocalypse, I moved fully into, well, what I was doing then was IT, I thought, but it turned out I was doing marketing, I was doing SEO, advertising, and so on. So I made it formal, and I moved into Johnson & Johnson, and I was in J&J for many years in a series of roles at the national and European level. But since then, I've joined Continuum, and I've been able to kind of focus in on my true love, which is strategy. So I'm going to talk to you about how you can utilize that to double your business, theoretically. So the core question is, well, do you have to work twice as hard? And the honest answer is probably. Maybe 3 times or 4 times as hard, but it's not that simple. It's much more complicated than that. Because if you simply just do what you were doing twice as much, that won't necessarily deliver twice the results. What it will make you is very, very tired. You're going to be pulling off in lots of different directions, or your team will, all doing subtly, trying to do the right thing, but it isn't necessarily organized and arranged. And that's what strategy will give you. It's about organizing or focusing that activity towards that endpoint, that thing that you want to achieve. So these dogs are emblematic of those tactics without strategy. And the reason why this happens is because that journey towards conversion is long. The customer goes through a pretty long journey where they decide ultimately they want to buy or purchase or convert or whatever your communication or commercial goal is. And they pass through many, many touch points. So whether you're a small organization or a big organization, they might be seeing your ads. They could be written by one person, looking at your content, put together by another person, deal with a salesperson, again, another person. So all of these handovers create challenges. And so rather than one big conversion, you've got a sequence of micro conversions, each one building on the last. Ideally, these must be organized. If they're not coherent, if they're not synchronized, then the danger is the victory you won at the last micro-conversion gets squandered at the next stage because you've got a different conception of that customer or their need at that point. So this is what strategy does. It attempts to tie those stages all together. And so if you want to double your business, in truth, it's not about 100% more advertising or 100% more content. It's about a 15% uplift or success at each of these stages, which is much more achievable because it's focused. You can focus on the activity and focus on the impact. So what you definitely have to do, whether you work twice as hard, is to work twice as smart because you need to understand those stages, understand how they connect, understand your customer, and then build and focus your activity with that in mind. So this is how we organize ourselves in Continuum. This is the Continuum, jokingly called, but in fact it's a very real way for us to think about our customers. We have kind of 4 broad areas of activity: strategy, design, delivery, and campaigns. And what you'll notice about that is there are 2 circles in the middle. Those are the customer. The outer circle is the client, our client, but the inner circle is our client's customer. So everything we do is either informed directly by the customer or feeds directly into the customer. And each of these are iterative activities till we get it exactly right, and then it passes over to the next stage. So as I said, strategy is our key focus. So let's look at how or what that means. Everybody says, well, you need strategy. But what does strategy mean? There's plenty of people who say, I'm a strategic planner. I heard someone talk about strategic planning today. There are lots of myths about what it might be. But these are the 4 fundamental things you have to answer. If you have these, you have the bones of a strategy. So you need to define who you're selling to, what is your value proposition, what is your message, and what channels are you going to deliver that message through. And what's critical about all of that, though, is the articulation. So Eisenhower used to say that planning, the plan was nothing, but planning was everything. The process of articulating the plan was fantastic because it meant that everybody involved, everybody who touched the plan, understood the basis for business. In his case, the business was war. But it allowed them, if they did have to pivot or do something unexpected, they were all pivoting off the same set of assumptions. And it meant that everybody understood where they were at any given time and what their responsibilities were. And the same is true for strategy. It's about articulating it. And when you articulate, you can see how the pieces fit together. So I gave you those 4 items. In the center is the value proposition. Aligned around that are your customers. Whether you've got 2 or 4 or 15 customers, they should all be influenced by the same value proposition. If they've got two broadly different value propositions, you've probably got two different businesses. Around that are the products that each of those customers gets, and next come the journey that you take them on, the conversion process. So all of these fit together like pieces of Lego, and like any piece of Lego, there are better buildings and there are worse buildings. So only by picking them carefully and designing them to fit together can you build that beautiful building. So to give an example of that complexity, ask yourself, how many models of your customers do you have right now? And I can tell you, if you've got one marketing manager and one sales manager and one guy writing content, you've probably got 5 or 6 models of just that one customer. Because everybody, if you haven't articulated who the customer is, putting it down on paper and had everyone look at it, they're all going to have subtly different versions of that customer. Now, why that's important is because as the customer progresses through that conversion funnel, they're going to be faced with a subtly different offering because it's going to be expressed based on those models. Now, once you've written the models or articulated them, people can disagree, but at least they know now what they're disagreeing about. I can tell you right now, they're already disagreeing in your organization if you haven't done that. They just haven't had it out on the table. So the danger with that is you create an echo chamber that gets worse and worse. But the benefit of articulating it is that it impacts every single stage of these funnels. And there's a lot of evidence to support that. We see that open rates for emails, for instance, are 5 times greater where personalization is articulated, twice the click-through rate, 18 times the revenue for focused emails as opposed to broadcast emails. Ads are twice as effective if they're behaviorally focused. In other words, if they're targeted at particular customers. Equally, the web 2 times as effective. Customers say that they're 48% more likely to take your offering if the marketing has been adjusted for their personality in whatever way. And it's also incredibly competitive. In the US right now, the research suggests that only 44% of B2B marketers are using this. So the market is wide open to address your customers in this fashion. And I can tell you that the remainder of that 100%, they'll be doing it in the next year or two. So when I say define the customer, what do I mean? Well, here is a framework or an approach you could do. If you can answer these questions, you can define the customer. Who are they? So background, demographics, and so on, the classic elements of segmentation. But then we start to get more specific and talk about, well, what are their goals? What are they trying to achieve? And what are their challenges? What stops them from achieving that? And what are the gains? What do they get if they can achieve those goals? And then why, in their own words, would they take your product? Would they buy your offering? Or why would they object? What would stop them from doing it? And finally, how? How are you going to get them to change? What's your marketing message going to be? What's the elevator pitch? What channels will you use? And it's easy to write those questions, but what's an easy way to prime the pump to get going? Because it's always very hard. If I ask clients to come in, they say, and I ask them who their customer is, do they understand their customer? No one says, I don't know my customer. Everybody knows. But actually filling that sheet out is very difficult. This is a useful framework to help it. It's very simple, but very effective. And you can see it identifies 3 key elements we want to work through. So do it through a workshop with your team: goals, pains, and gains. So I'll give you an example of how this works. We did this recently for a client or a potential client looking at a C-suite executive. So their customer was the C-suite executive. We looked at the goals, pains, and gains. So the goals were that they wanted to be recognized for their leadership, to be a positive force for change, deliver shareholder value, be recognized for insights, drive growth, and change the internal and external status quo. The gains, if they did that, is that they would be viewed as positive from that perspective. They would make savings, create growth, drive efficiencies, etc. But in their pains, we were able to identify something that made us do something very strong here. Their pains were information overload. They didn't have time. There was a lot of facts, a lot of unknowns, and they also had to delegate a lot of the work. So they had to trust the person they were delegating to give them the right shortlist for their decisions. And so in here was an insight that we were building a website for the C-suite executive, but the reality was someone else was doing the research and would hand it over to them. So we needed to make sure we're also addressing that stakeholder. So this approach can be very insightful in terms of dealing with all of your stakeholders across your total offering. So I talked about the value proposition. So the customer is one half of the value proposition. The other half is your offering. And a value proposition is defined really if you can answer these questions. So who is the target? As I say, it's one half of the value proposition. What is their time horizon? Over how long will they have to make a decision or own the product, etc.? What do you want these target entities to do? Sometimes it's buy a thing, but sometimes it's not. So there can be other activities. What are their alternatives? So your value proposition has to consider your competitors to understand why you stand out. And what is the experience that your customers, your potential customers will get if they opt for your option versus your competitors. And that has to be specific, actionable, and comparable. And it's also worth recognizing that just because you go through this process doesn't mean you've got a good value proposition. Some are worse than others. So you have to go through it. It's an iterative process where you test it and test it with your customers, ideally, directly. So again, this framework simplifies this approach. Again, we look at your products and services, your pain relievers, and your gain creators. And so when you start to test it, you can put this beside the other diagram and see, well, do your pain relievers relieve their pains? Do your gain creators deliver on their gains? And obviously, the closer the match, the better the fit. So there's a great opportunity to really organize your thinking around this and organize your team so that when it comes to the end point, you're all pulling in the same direction. So just to summarize, it's all about small improvements along the conversion funnel. They will combine together to give you a very big impact. It's strategic coordination, and ultimately that's about a shared model of your customers and an articulated value proposition. Thank you very much.